Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation podcast. I'm Ben Haupt, joined by my friends David Rufner and Jared Townley, and we're excited to be back with you today to talk a little bit about everyday people getting into Bitcoin. Some interesting stories to share, but first we want to just catch up with each other. So, Jared, how are things in your neck of the woods? Is it cooling down at
Things are pretty yes, it is. But now is the time of year that people say they live here for these very months. So I looked yesterday in Michigan where my parents are. It's 50 in as a high and 30 in the morning. And today it's 75 right now, going to be 81. The lows are like 57. It's just it's amazing. So I'm loving it so far. We'll see what real winter is like, but fall here is fantastic. We've had a really, call it, stressful couple of weeks. So the hard stuff and then the good stuff after. So our little Judah is almost 5 months now. But to save you the whole thing, he got an infection, had an allergic reaction to antibiotic, was in the ER, hospitalized for a night, and
Man.
with a GI bleed too. So it's been a pretty wild couple of weeks here. You know, we there's a trip to the ER before this one because he had 104.6 fever too. So we're just kind of trying to gather ourselves and try and move forward in some semblance of like normalcy and not freaking out and worrying about every single little thing that happens and every twitch and turn that he makes. So he's fine. He's home. We think everything is okay, but we're still trying to make sure that infection is gone and trying to heal his little belly. So that was a crazy call. I mean, we have 3 kids, so I got to keep living with the kids. Emily's with Judah at the hospital, and I'm trying to be here, but don't want to necessarily be here, be with her, be with Judah. A wild couple of weeks. But before all of that happened, David and I actually got to spend, I don't know, not even 24 hours, like 12 hours together at his place where he lives. And that was such a special treat. I mean, I was telling Emily that it was so bizarre. Like, you just think about, I never knew who you were, David, or I never had even heard your name. And yet this
That's with
thing,
most people.
this thing of Bitcoin though brought us together. And so I'm going to a pastor's conference in Southern California and, come and drive up in the mountains and stay where you are and at your home. I mean, it was absolutely just kind of otherworldly in the sense of a connection that isn't like Christianity per se in the church. And maybe that makes me uninteresting. That seems to be how I know most everyone else in my life. Those circles, I don't necessarily have too many other circles I run in. And so it was like a very cool, hey, we're friends because yes, we have faith in Jesus together, but also we love this thing called Bitcoin. So it was a delight to be with you and to stay in your house. It was such a gift too. So that was a great time. Loved it. I think one of the things we talked about, we kicked around all the sorts of things in your little man cave study that you're sitting in today. And I'm still kicking myself. We didn't take a picture together, which is like, I am the picture person. And so I am just utterly ashamed of myself that we did not do that.
You need to
But
come
the
back
thing,
with Emily and the kids. Yeah.
yeah, right. There you go. Now I have a reason. I just have to get a picture, Emily. We have to drive to the mountains so I can take a picture. But the thing that I valued most of our time together, we were sitting talking on the couch and just talking about friends as adults with kids. And I mean, we're especially now, with Judah being in the hospital and me being with the kids, it was like, wow, like I really need those friendships, but yet how hard is it to have those sort of things when, your kids are sleeping so much, when you're running around with all these sort of things. And I just appreciated your wisdom, and it was a good time. So thank you so much for hosting me, and it was a blast. We'll do it again soon. I can't wait for that. But until then, it was great.
Yeah. Well, awesome. You kind of delighted me just now and humbled me. So thank you for that. But hey, wow, you guys have been through the ringer with little Judah. I'm glad he's home and well. I hope mom is well then as well. That can be traumatic, is traumatic when your little ones go to the hospital. So
Right.
I'm glad
Right.
he's home and trending in the right direction. Wild. Yeah, as far as us, it was. It seems like about 3 months ago you were here, Jared, and it was like I
Right?
think less than 2 weeks, something like this. No,
Yep.
it's fun. It's fall here in our little mountain valley. I feel like there's tons of color. And why is that? Because the scrub oaks are yellow. So I saw a picture of northern Michigan colors, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what color looks like. All of the different colors of fall. But it is a beautiful time here, and yeah, things turn gold here from any number of the evergreen needles that I'm looking at right now. Our property is filled with huge ponderosa and sugar pines. And I was thought, oh, this is going to be great. I will never have anything to rake up. I had no idea how many needles these trees produce. So instead of like big piles of fluffy leaves to have the Townley kids jump into, their pokey piles of needles. But we're cleaning those up. Yeah, the family's doing well. Boy, we it's funny how life goes, right? You go through just challenging seasons, and then suddenly you kind of come up for air. And I think we kind of see that we've come up for air now, and you don't want to ruin the moment, but you're also like in a little bit of sobriety, talking me with my wife, saying, yeah, let's be refreshed by this. Let's look out for other people who aren't enjoying this, and let's prepare ourselves because we it's not as if you can script this for all of life or that you deserve it in any one moment. But I'm pleased to say that not this weekend, but next weekend, both of the college boys will be home for the weekend. It'll be boy number three's 17th birthday. So we're excited about that. So yeah, that's kind of things as they're going on right now. Indeed, it was fun. I've had both Ben and Jared at my home here for a while. And Jared, that's the last thing I'll say. You jogged it. Two things. First of all, you and Emily are in the most challenging years, which is to say early childhood years in terms of adult friendships. It just is true. So hang in there, enjoy the ones you have, push your wife out that front door if and when you're blessed to do so, to go off and be with the girlfriends, and then enjoy it when and where it might be reciprocated. But I also appreciated your idea of, well, people might not know this. If you're a pastor, you know this. If you're not a pastor, you might not know this. When you are a pastor of a church, that can become your whole world very, very, very easily, or nearly your whole world, a significant portion of your world. So you're right. Here we are as three pastors, three Christian men, more broadly, three baptized children of God. That's the best of it all, still, right there. For that will endure this age and the coming age. But it is fun. It is fun to have this thing that you want for the church, your friends in the church, the people you care for in the church, but it can also be disconnected entirely from the church, and it is a neat community, this Bitcoin community. So you helped me reflect on that, Jared. So thank you very much. And with that, throw it back around to the horn to Ben, who started us off. Always gets third place here because he's a gentleman. Ben, how are you and
All
your
right.
family?
My family's great. We're doing well. Our son Aiden was home from college for a brief weekend a couple of weekends ago. Came back from California and spent a couple of days with us here in St. Louis. But what was exciting was he was excited to go back, and he has some ties here to St. Louis beyond just our family, some friends and such, and that was good to reunite with them and challenging, but at the end of the day, he was excited to go back, and that was good for Selena and me, and just knowing that he's having a good time. Noah is busy with jazz choir. He is diving deep into singing and choir and with almost all upperclassmen. So that's become kind of his thing. He's in a play this fall. So it's been a busy season. My wife and I were just out in Paso Robles, California for a long weekend with some donors for an event called Barnabas for PLI. And man, I got to tell you, I fell in love with the Paso Robles wine region. And if there's any I mean, there's a strong chance we're starting to talk about where do we move after Noah goes to college, and it looks more and more like it's a possibility that he would end up in Irvine as well. That we would we will definitely be pulling up the tent pegs from St. Louis, Missouri, as soon as Noah graduates high school, because there is literally nothing that is keeping me in this place. So yeah, so it's been a busy season, but a great a great season, and starting already to look forward to some potential new things. And 2029, that's a nice 4 years away. By then, who knows what Bitcoin will be worth, and I'm convinced that it will be worth more than what it is worth now. That has certainly been the trend, and if it continues in any kind of way that it's been going, we might actually even be able to afford eking out a little existence in California. So we'll see what happens. But today we want to talk a little bit about some friends of ours that we have heard, some listeners of this very podcast. I have one little fun story. One of the so one person that's been listening, I've heard from, is a former member of a congregation that I served in South Florida, and it's always great to hear from her. And another listener pointed out quite perceptively, she knows me and my family, and she noticed that I have a picture of Aiden over here right next to Jesus. I don't know if you can see it in this frame or not, but she said, "Hey, you need a picture of your younger son." And I went, "Wow, she's really paying attention to the YouTube podcast." But here was what was really interesting. She's I knew that she's been kind of a casual listener, and she's mentioned it a couple of times that she listened to an episode or whatever. But more recently, she told me that she and her husband took some money out of some investments. I will say she is a little bit older than me, and I think that, and the reason that I say that is because, first, I have tons of respect for her, and second, sometimes people think, oh, Bitcoin is only for, millennials or Gen Z or something like that. But this is a gal she and her husband are retired, and they took some money out of some investments and plowed it into Bitcoin, and it did well. And so she was quite happy with the investment. She has another family member that's more our age who is into Bitcoin, uh and so she had a good experience of taking some money, investing in it, seeing it as an investment, as a short-term savings vehicle. And David, one of the things that you were asking recently is, from some other people that you've talked with, is Bitcoin liquid, right? Do I have to put my money in and then, like, hold it in there for years and years for it to be worth anything or to go up, or is it easy to get it back out regardless of it going up and down? And they had a great time. They figured it all out. I didn't walk her through this. Maybe her family member did, but here's a what I would consider a non-technical Bitcoin owner. She said that herself. She said, I don't know that I am all understand all of the technology, and frankly, I don't either. It's pretty the rabbit hole is pretty deep, but but this went well for her, and it was a good experience. And I just thought we should highlight some stories like that, because I think we're getting more and more sort of everyday listeners who maybe were a little Bitcoin skeptical, but it's starting to be more of a like, well, maybe we could try this with a little bit of savings or whatever. So, you guys have any stories along those lines or any reflections from that one?
Well, I'm curious what, obviously only share what you feel comfortable, what you know, but I'm curious if she shared like where she did this, like what was she buying ETF, was she buying the asset proper, and then even like if she shared with you what made her feel, the word is safe, that's coming to mind, like what made her feel safe enough to do this sort of thing. If she shared that, I'd be curious if you're willing to
She
share.
didn't. She did say that it came out of so Lutherans will know this term well, Thrivent, and I'll circle back around on Thrivent. I am not throwing shade at Thrivent, but she said that they took some money out of Thrivent, which would be a kind of a Lutheran version of like a Fidelity or something like this there, or a Edward Jones. So she took it out of that. My guess is that she probably used Coinbase. I don't know, but it
Wow, sure.
that was what she said, was that she took it out of Thrivent. Now I will say, for speaking for up for Thrivent, I'm a Thrivent member. I have some money in Thrivent, and recently I made a switch with some money that I have at Thrivent, and there's a variety of reasons why. It's a little retirement account, but I took it out of a stock that I just felt terrible about owning, and I I'm poking David a little bit because we've started a little bet about this, but I took it out of one stock and put it into a Bitcoin ETF called IBIT, IBIT, which is BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. So even through Thrivent, you can buy something that is close to Bitcoin, although when you own IBIT shares or MicroStrategy or any of these kind of stocks, you don't actually own any Bitcoin. You just own something that is essentially tracking the Bitcoin price.
They have to be, well, in the case of the IBIT, it is backed by Bitcoin at a
Yes.
set rate per IBIT share. In the case of like a MicroStrategy stock, they're over the course of time trying to back each common share with more and more Bitcoin. Although it's more
Or less
complicated
and
than that. Yeah,
less,
that's
depending.
or less and less. There you go. Depending on how you look at it, Ben. And that actually is the nature of our quote unquote bet. We nailed it down. So Ben, at this point, I mean, we just can't be cryptic. He rotated out of MSTR to IBIT. I still like MSTR, and the bet is it was the date he did it in September. We created a spreadsheet that we share as if, I don't know if it was $100 or $1,000, but it just said, hey, if on this day I bought $100 of IBIT, how much was it worth in dollars? And if on the same day I bought $100 worth of MicroStrategy, how much MicroStrategy was it? And what was it valued at in dollars? And then 4 years from that day, we'll take the final snapshot and see pound for pound which outperformed the other. And then the winner. So what's at stake here is just dinner. So it
Yeah, we're
occurs to me
both
now, Ben,
winners
4 years from now
essentially.
is 2029. Yeah, exactly. At 2029, that might mean, possibly after you move to California, it's dinner at somebody's residence or somebody's town is what it would look like. But yeah, no, and I was kind of similarly interested in, Ben, do you know if this individual was kind of familiar with sort of tax implications of buying Bitcoin and rotating out relatively quickly? Do you know
That's
that?
a
I'm just
great
curious.
question. I do not, and these are all the kinds of questions I invited her to come onto our podcast. So maybe she'll listen to this episode and hear the
Oh
kinds of
yeah.
questions that we're interested in. And I would love just a shout out to any of our listeners if you have just what you would consider like an everyday experience with Bitcoin that you think is not that glamorous and is not worth talking about. I actually beg to differ. I think it's really exciting that everyday people are getting into Bitcoin and just having some kind of experience with it and trying to start learning what questions there are. I'm fascinated by that. So yeah, maybe the person listens to the podcast and decides, oh, maybe I could be on after all. So yeah, great question you're asking.
Hope so. That'd be great. I think that's a great invitation, Ben. I think all three of us certainly affirm that. That would be a lot of fun. So, what are the questions for Ben about that story? Yeah, I'm curious. I think you were telling that story, and I was also thinking, and you might not be able to answer this either. I was thinking of Tesla, right? Tesla bought so much Bitcoin some time ago, and then I think it was like in 21 or 2022, they liquidated a fair amount of it. And maybe that was only like 10%, 15, 20, I don't know. But they said at the time that part of their doing that was to prove to themselves internally that it could be liquidated. In other words, if I buy something, people tell me it's worth a lot, but there's no market to actually buy it back, then it isn't worth what people are telling me it's worth. There's actually, no marketplace there for it. So it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe she didn't set out to do that, Ben, but it wouldn't surprise me if having done this, that is a takeaway she would have. But I don't know that, and maybe you do or do not know that. But I could see somebody doing that as well. Hey, we dipped our toes in. We're going to rotate out. We see some topside right now. But I would think even the experience of doing that would give somebody a little bit of confidence to keep considering the market and keep considering maybe another entry point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
who knows?
I can answer from my own experience of, I mean, I've used Coinbase over the years, and what I love about them is they do keep track of how much you bought, when you bought it for, what it was worth, and when you sell, uh, they can tell you exactly what it's worth, and so it's very easy then for you to just give that record to your tax preparer, or if you are your tax preparer, it's pretty simple to plug that in. If you own Bitcoin for less than 1 year and you made some profits, you're going to pay what's called short-term capital gains tax on that. And if you've held it longer than a year, you're going to pay long-term capital gains tax on it, which is less. So the government kind of incentivizes people to hold it for more than a year. But I mean, if you sell it for a loss, you don't pay any tax then, and you could even use that to put it up against other tax that you owe. So yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward on the tax stuff, especially if you're not like day trading. If you're day trading, then and
Right.
you're incurring all these transactions, then that's a lot to keep track of. But an occasional purchase here and there, this is every platform that you buy on can spit you out a spreadsheet at the end of the year, and they usually, my experience is that they'll even send you an email and say, here's, it's tax season, here's your here's where you can find the tax materials.
And
Right, right.
that's one of the things I think is beneficial of this sort of, call them centralized, custodian stuff like that. I mean, even an ETF is going to do a
Yep.
similar thing too, right? It's going to tell you when you sold, what your cost basis is, and if anything, too, it's an argument for people to use one platform maybe, or try and stick to one. Because if you're sending your Bitcoin between River and Coinbase, they're not going to be able to as easily track those sort of things. So if you got a place you like, stick with it and keep buying there unless you've got a reason to maybe switch. So I think this might be a good time to interject my story here. So talking about exchanges and buying Bitcoin. So I don't remember exactly when it was. I was going to look and scroll back a couple weeks or so ago. There was what we would call or at least it has been called now, a flash crash on October 9th, I believe, was the date, or the 10th. It was the 10th. So October 10th. So a couple weeks ago as we're recording this, but probably a month or so by the time this actually comes out. And it was insane. I mean, I have not seen something like this in a long time. And so Bitcoin, I mean, it went from like 120 to 103 or something like that, or 113 or something like that, to 103,000. So a $10,000, down drop. But some of these other altcoins, right? So things that are not Bitcoin were much worse. So there was another cryptocurrency called ADA, or Cardano, was down 60% in 8 hours, but really happened in like 10 or 15 minutes. And so that means for every dollar you had, it lost 60 cents of that dollar, and it was now worth 40. So put that in perspective for you. And so it was insane to see the amount of altcoins that just literally had no one willing to step in and buy them. And so we just talked about being liquid, right? That Bitcoin is more liquid than any other of these cryptocurrencies, that these other ones are not at all as deep of a market. There's not as many buyers stepping in, waiting to buy these. In the Bitcoin world, we talk about the hodlers of last resort. These are the crazy people that will buy Bitcoin, whether it's down 10, 20, 50, 80%, because their conviction in whatever asset, that Bitcoin is different from everything else. And we've said that, but I think it bears repeating, especially as you look at that we say, hey, Bitcoin, it might not be the thing you see on your Coinbase app. It might not be the thing you hear about on the news that's going up 1,000% over the course of a year or something like that. But when it gets bad out there, you're not going to be wanting to be holding all these other things that are not Bitcoin. So the story I want to tell in that crash, though, is sort of twofold. So one, there were some exchanges that went down. At least I remember reading this. I forget which ones did, but there were some that you couldn't access your orders. You couldn't access your account because there were too many people, because stuff was going on. It just wasn't functioning well. And this has happened before in big downturns and things like that. But one that did not have any issues was River. And so somebody that I know had placed a bid for Bitcoin. And so what that means is you can go in and say, hey, I want to buy, let's use the example of $100. I want to buy $100 of Bitcoin, but I only want to buy it if it gets to this price. And so you type in that price, you hit submit, and then if the price of Bitcoin drops and there's someone who's willing to sell you their Bitcoin at that price, then you become the buyer of their Bitcoin at that price, at that limit price, that bid price. And so this person had set a bid for $105,000 for Bitcoin, not total. I'm assuming it was a much less total dollars, but nevertheless, they wanted to buy Bitcoin at $105,000, and it was crazy because before this, that number would have felt like, well, that's really low. Like, you're not going to get that. Maybe you'll get that in whatever bear market we get to in 2026 or whatever later. But in the middle of this flash crash, Bitcoin dropped down to, I even saw somebody said they got a bid filled on this exchange at 103,000 as well. And so this person didn't have to log on to their app and like, oh come on, we gotta buy. It was already there waiting, and the exchange River did exactly what it said it was going to do. And so this person bought Bitcoin at 105,000, and then by the time later in that afternoon, it was already up to 112,000 per one BTC. So I don't know what the math is on what sort of percent that is, but within hours, they had already gained X amount of percent on their investment because this exchange River was doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing. The person I talked to them, they were, yeah, oh yeah, I got my bid filled. It was pretty cool. It's like, good for you. Good for you. That is pretty cool. So it just people are always, and it's someone that you maybe wouldn't expect to, like, hey, this person is setting, what some people might call stink bids for Bitcoin. Like, how cool is that? They're just excited to get their hands on some cheap Bitcoin, right? We talked about that here, that when Bitcoin's price goes down, we should really get excited because we get to exchange, David, as you've told us many times, we get to exchange our bad dollars for the good money of Bitcoin at a greater per dollar per Bitcoin value. And so we should be happy when things go down because we get to actually get more Bitcoin into our hands than not. So I guess any questions for me about that story, or any observations at least?
I would just say, not to be ageist or anything, but I think this is a really interesting phenomenon, is that Bitcoin is not just for millennials or Gen Z anymore, and it's not for
Right.
people that are like highly technical, like computer nerds. I mean, clearly when Bitcoin started, it was it was a very small group of people that knew about it, and we were all much later to the game than that. But this person is not would not be the age of the three of us. And so
Right.
I
Right.
just think that's really interesting, and I think that shows how important of an asset it is that there are it's not just for the person that is, a techie or a computer nerd, or kind of, just doesn't have much sense of the world and just kind of flippantly buying it. These are people that have been around for a
You
bit.
know, right. Right. I want to just add to that or come alongside that and say I've been doing some research recently, and this gets sensitive for some reasons, not having to do with who the person is. I'm going to tell you who the person is, but I've been doing some research recently on Bitcoin and some Bitcoin products, thinking of my own mother. So she's a fixed income gal, right? She's got assets, 401ks, IRAs, a little bit of pension. You put it all together, and it's her financial portfolio in retirement. She and my dad worked a lifetime for it. My dad now died 7 years ago. There were some things early on with that plan that I didn't love. Like, anyways, there's some things that I still don't love. Her financial planner's a good guy. I don't know that he's a Bitcoin guy, but my issue is I think her portfolio is set up from what I'm doing a lot of diligent reading about and researching about. She's not high volatility, but she's on bonds, and she's not making a rate off of all that stuff that keeps up, for instance, with inflation. And now between Bitcoin itself in ETF wrappers, like you talked about, Ben, as well as some other products, I actually go back to the strategy right now. I'm still looking at strategy for some of their preferred stock instruments with some of their dividends. I mean, the dividend playing stuff is far better than some of the bonds she's in. So I'm asking myself those questions, not just for me, not just for my children. I'm doing both of those things, by the way, and that relates to at least one of my stories. But I'm asking it for a generation above me as well, out of love and concern for them, honestly.
And this
So,
is, I
yeah.
think Bitcoin has this reputation of like, I'm gonna get rich and like buy a Lamborghini, right? And these are not those kinds of people. They're not trying to buy a Lambo or a
Yep.
yacht. It the thing that's real is like the 60/40 portfolio is not, it's not cutting it. And if you start looking out at your retirement and you see like, oh no, the runway looks like it might end, that is not a good thing. What do we do? These are wise people that are trying to be good stewards, and Bitcoin becomes a real possibility to lengthen the runway and to provide for them and their livelihood. David, you had another.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to take us on to another story, and at some point, I want to hear the
Sure.
story of your friend that recently got into
Yeah.
Bitcoin too. But we don't need to leave this one if you have other thoughts.
The thought was past results are not a promise for future returns, right? You hear that. That's like every fiduciary will say that as a caveat over and over again. And I'm not a, I'm not, we're not. So take what we say with a grain of salt, or all the more if you hear something that we say and it intrigues you and you say, I think that sounds right, vet it for yourself. We can't do that homework for you. We can maybe send you off into a particular direction to do homework and talk with your professional, but we're not them ultimately. But back to it, like in the market evolves, but the game's sort of the game afoot hasn't in other senses changed, except for I think it's our conviction that much is changing. We just crossed over $38 trillion in debt as a nation. I'll review it again. I've done it in some past episodes. A million seconds ago was a little over 11 days ago. I can think of that. Even my kids can think of that. I bet the Townley, your daughter Zoe, could count, right? She could tick off 11 days and kind of see what it was until grandma and grandpa come. So she can conceive of that. A billion seconds is 30 plus years ago. All three of us can conceive of that. Our children can't. They haven't lived that yet. They kind of think forward to it, but it's like 2x. My 16-year-old say that's twice as much as I am old. For sure. A billion seconds, 3,000 plus years ago. Wow, that's a leap. That's a leap. And so we're ticking this off. So I think what we
You meant
are
you meant
cognizant
trillion
of,
there, right?
maybe even thank you, trillion. Trillion seconds is 3,000 plus years ago. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. Suddenly, our debt to GDP as a nation is profound, absolutely profound. I remember in '08, '09, '10 when there was this thing called the Tea Party, and why? Because we were edging up towards 10 trillion. So in the first 250 plus years, 10 trillion, and now in 15 years, another 28 trillion so far. We're averaging a new trillion less than every 100 days. So we don't, we're precisely interested in this because we don't think what has been is any longer. We are headed into brand new territory, and it's like being in a car. It's nice having an accelerator. I've only I've only seen the salt flats before. I've never driven on there. It's maybe one of the few places where you can just lay on the accelerator, and as long as you keep the wheels pointed forward, have fun. Just let's see how fast this car can go. Nearly everywhere else, if you were to do that, danger, danger. Danger abounds. Other people are out and about. There's curves, there's bumps, all the things. And we're just pressing the gas on this fiscal monetary machine, and it's frightening. So, having said all that, so does it at the same time, we want it for each age, maybe uniquely to each age and stage. But yeah, I revel with you to hear that it's not just us, and from what I understand, we're not even the sweet spot demographic. It would be younger, but nor does interest in this stop at our ages, respectively. Here, there are others as well. Has something to offer.
Well, and
I
I
have two
think too.
stories. Go ahead,
Sorry,
Jared. Yeah.
one more thing. I just really appreciate, Ben, the thing you said about not getting rich to buy a Lambo, which is so funny because I do think you're right that many people hear about crypto, at least, as the crypto bros, right? That they're out there, driving their fancy cars, having lavish parties, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe I think we do some of that to ourselves when we talk about these dramatic price things, like, oh yeah, this is going to be like a couple $1,000,000 in 2030. I mean, we just did an episode where I'm pretty sure a short I made was like Bitcoin to 1,000,000 by 2030. And it's sort of a hopium is the word we'd use, but kind of like a big dream price target. And that does is it really takes away from, I think, the the power of it to save purchasing power
Yep.
over time,
Yep.
because that's the real reason why we're here, right? And so another thing that I think I sent this tweet to you guys, Eric Balkunis does a lot of ETF work. Compared, I don't know if it's still true, but it was true on October 16th when he posted this, that GLD, which is the ETF that tracks the price of gold, is outperforming SPY, which tracks like the S&P 500 since it launched in 2004. All right. And so I think that is shocking to people, right? That is, hey, gold is a bar that does nothing. It just kind of sits there, and there's no earnings for GLD. It doesn't produce any. There's no company behind it. And so shouldn't something that tracks some of the most income producing productive companies, shouldn't that be more protective of your purchasing power over time? I mean, hey, there are people who say if you're not keeping track with the S&P, if you're not being tracked with SPY, then you're doing it wrong. That's your hurdle rate. And gold is doing, or at least was doing, better than SPY. And so again, we're all into not necessarily these, yes, do I hope that someday my Bitcoin holdings will be enough for me to buy a house or put a nice down payment on a house? Absolutely. But I recognize it now, being almost 5 years into this thing, that it's not a get rich quick overnight thing. And as we've talked about here, like, Jesus might have some hard words for us if that's what we're trying to do. Right. I mean,
right.
we're not here to, store up treasures where moth and rust destroy, because we know that there's much more to life than that. But we are interested very much in what it does allow us to do, as, of course, we've also talked a lot about. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's so important that, hey, you don't have to lop yourself into this bucket of people who are trying to like get rich quick or make $1.5 billion overnight. Well, no, we're just all a bunch of normal people who want to be able to live and want to be able to keep the time, effort, and energy we've made and store it somewhere, so that then when it's time to actually consume that, we have a place to draw it from. And that I think is what we all say Bitcoin is the best and premier asset thing to hold over time, if that's what you're trying to do with your wealth, your time, your
Jared,
energy.
I think this message, what you just said, is really helpful too, for people that have known about Bitcoin for a long time but have not invested. I keep on hearing from people that are maybe that are a little more tech savvy and are paying attention have been paying attention to Bitcoin for a while, but the message is always, oh man, if I would have bought Bitcoin when I first heard about it. I mean, when I heard about it, it was worth this, and I missed that boat. And it's this common thing of like, oh, I could have, I mean, it's almost this like, I could have bought a Lambo sort of mindset. And getting people
Right.
out of that, like, Bitcoin is not a get rich scheme. It's not to buy Lambos or a yacht. It it is a better savings vehicle, in my opinion and in my experience, than other, again, this is not financial advice, but in my experience, it has helped my family to park some savings. And that, I think, then you can enter into Bitcoin whenever, right? If it's 112,000, that's fine. If it's going to continue going up, and every indication that I'm seeing is that it will, it seems like it's a good savings vehicle, even if there are these volatile drawdowns and that sort of thing. But yeah, helping people to get out of the Bitcoin equals Lambo mindset is, maybe that's the mission that we need to be on. All right, David, tell us a little bit about your friend and the conversation that you had recently.
Yeah, I have a way hearing our conversation, hearing the two of you talk. Three words come to mind: preserve. That would be me talking with my mom. After all their hard work, we're trying to preserve its purchasing power in a world with higher inflation. She's not growing her position anymore by way of having an active vocation that gets a paycheck. I do marvel at nearly every retiree how many vocations they still have, and that's really worth saying. Typically, few of them, if any, come with a paycheck. She certainly still has many vocations, but her paid vocation, that's not happening anymore. So we're trying to preserve. With Megan and I, we're trying to preserve and grow. Um, and then with my children who are nearing the workforce, although already have some part-time jobs on the side, they're going to be looking to grow it. And that's, by the way, that's always been the spectrum. That's always been the spectrum. So nothing's changed there. Suddenly Bitcoin's a legitimate asset that fits into these, depending on your age and stage of where you're at. I will add this though. I think the next word that comes to mind with Bitcoin, apart from traditional investment vehicles, is that there's a level of protection though I think that Bitcoin offers, which is to say it is not tied to any given nation state. It is not tied to any given nation state. History is riddled with currencies where either the currency is no longer or the currency and the nation that had it are no longer, right? This happens at a more regular cycle or at a regular cycle. It just happens. It happens all often, by the way. The trajectory is one of an initial youthful civilization, but eventually, at about the time they hit their apex, or they hit their apex because of this, they start coin clipping in one way or another. They start debasing their money one way or the other. It's not a happy sign. Where you see debasement, history says not so great. And so, why is Bitcoin seen by us as a protection piece? Is because it steps outside of any individual currency, and in our case, the US dollar. Now, that doesn't make it magically delicious just because it's outside of that. It could have other significant faults. So do your homework, come to your own conviction. But I think that's what we're talking about here as we kind of work our way down the age spectrum. We've got preserving, middle years, preserving and growing, and then growing. Yeah, I had a buddy text me 3 days ago. It was earlier this week, and he said, "Hey, let's talk about 1517, the organization I serve." He says, "But really, let's just could we catch up and talk Bitcoin, BTC?" He said. Well, I'm like, I happen to be available right now. So we talked just for 5 or 10 minutes then, set up an appointment for the next day after work hours when we both could talk, and talked for nearly an hour. And I'll say this about this friend. So I have an older sister, younger sister. I love them dearly, but just being the middle child and only boy in my family, and they had one boy cousin and like 10 or 11 girl cousins. I've just always enjoyed male friendship as a guy who's hungry for brothers. So I love my male companionship because these are my brothers. And then another part of that is just having big brothers. So somebody's calling me up, somebody who I've considered a big brother, looked up to for as long as I've known him, quite literally. He may or may not know that. Maybe he'll hear that because he apparently watches some of these. And he's asking me about it. And I find out quickly he's been doing homework. Holy cow. And I applaud this. I saw somebody once tweet on X something like this. And it's convicting, what I'm about to say. People will more likely spend 50 to 100 hours planning next summer's vacation than taking the time to consider what is money, and is ours parked safely? Is it preserved, and is it growing? Wow, that was me. That was me prior to Bitcoin as well. I mean, I'm a part of that. But this is a friend who had clearly been doing homework. Um, he had like all kinds of great questions. I mean, the first day we talked, I was exuberant and I was talking. I said, when we do get together the next day, come with your questions. And he had questions. He's like, ultimately, still, what is Bitcoin? Is it an asset? Is it a currency? Let's talk about it. He wanted it framed in gold. We talked about gold. In his case, he was ready for and kind of wanted to talk about some of the slightly more techie sides of Bitcoin itself, which is to say, and I'll just drop this. He, for whatever reason, it worked well for the questions he was asking, I said, I've been told that Bitcoin is one of the greatest computer science advances in the last 50 years. Why is that? Because when it comes to computers, computers are brilliant at replicating information, leaving copies everywhere. But that equates with essentially the double spend problem. If Bitcoin has no greater technology than a JPEG image on my desktop, I can send one JPEG to Jared, one JPEG to Ben, and I still have copies of those on mine. So who do they belong to? Particularly, that doesn't work. In other words, a JPEG and regular computer science doesn't work for Bitcoin. And I shared with him that this was one of Satoshi Nakamoto's breakthroughs. He figured out how to send a digital asset such that once I send it to you and you receive it, I no longer have proof of ownership of it, or therefore ownership of it. And we just talked about that. He needed that breakthrough. We talked about a few more things like that, but it's only like a day and a half later preparing for this with you guys that I realized what he really needed. He had been doing the personal work. He needed somebody to talk with to kind of say, like, I think this Bitcoin's a thing. I'm pretty sure you definitely think it's a thing. But could we just have some talk, just you and me, so that you very personally, you to me, David to him, I almost outed his name, can kind of affirm. And so that's sort of what I did, just to not be alone, quite frankly, be about a part of the community. So we talked about that. There did come a point, this is where it goes back to all of our conversation at this point. There did come a point though where he maybe thought, boy, but am I kind of late? And I said, you and I are at where we are. We can't do anything about that. But then I told him real quickly about my other story for the week. And I might even spend more time here explaining this than I did with him. But early the same week, my oldest son from school working on business degree said, Dad, I have to write a paper where I put together a business proposal. And I want it to have to do with something with Bitcoin. Do you have any ideas? And I said, yeah, I've got a couple, but the one that comes to mind is the spreadsheet I've been keeping on our house ever since we moved here 5 years ago. So I started paying on this in September of 2020. We're recording right now in October of 2025, 5 years and 1 month later. And I went ahead and shared with him the spreadsheet. And the particular one is where I price this home in Bitcoin, both at the original purchase price, which is static, that's not changing, but also in the Zillow Z estimate, right? And you can find different estimates, I'm sure, on Redfin and some other stuff, but I've just pegged it to the Zillow, the Zestimate, Z estimate. And in both of those, it doesn't matter which one you use, it's more profound with the regular purchase price. But in the original mortgage, we bought it for nearly the purchase price. I wouldn't say we bought it. The mortgage, what we mortgaged was a price point that was nearly 50 Bitcoin. And that same price has now fallen 5 years later to 3.7 Bitcoin. And if it keeps on this trajectory, what will that look like 5 years from now? That's dropped more than, it's like it costs less than 10% now of what it cost then. If it does that again, does that mean this home will be 0.35 Bitcoin? Which today is like what? That's $40,000, a little bit less, right? And so as I talked with my son about this, I said, I don't know how you turn this into a business model. Maybe you just become an educational consultant. I don't know what. But I said, Jed, because he and I have talked about this, this is part of our hope for you for housing and life is that you can not only save, but you can save in something that meaningfully grows. Your savings can outpace inflation. And then some of the just wonderful things that previous generations have taken for granted, such as home ownership, which is hard to take for granted now, would be accessible to you within a time. And I said that to my buddy then, who's saying, am I too late? Am I too late with my wife? And I said, no, first of all, for the two of you, you're not. But think all the more for your children. If what I just conveyed to him about the spreadsheet I've kept and the project my son's working on, boy, let's be excited about this for our children at least. And then in the meantime, as we figure out what that means for them, I would hope people sort of in their middle years Ben and I are certainly in our middle years, Jared. But Jared, you're finishing up those early childhood, starting a family years. I don't want to too quickly drag you into middle aged dumb
Oh
like
yeah.
Ben and I here. But let's figure that out too. So these two stories, like both in the same week, one very close son, but this longtime friend who I've just looked up to for a long time. I loved it. I was so excited to be having the conversation literally for him and his wife, but then for the kids as well.
And here's my insight and why, and I think my answer to the question, are we too late? These these stories for us are a big deal, right? Because it's still so
Yeah,
rare that an everyday person that we know, and we're talking about this every other week on a Bitcoin podcast, and we're assembling like 4 or 5 stories of people that we know. I mean, I don't know how many followers I have on Facebook or friends that I have on Facebook. I don't know, 1,000 or something. I mean, if we can only count on one hand the people that we know that are buying, we are very early. Once every single person that you know owns some Bitcoin, well, that will be a different thing. And even then, I think there will be questions about, well, how much Bitcoin do you own, and when did you get into it, and all these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, and again, I don't want to get into the Bitcoin equals Lambo kind of thing, but I do think hearing just a few everyday people who are not Bitcoiners or who are not running a Bitcoin podcast that are getting interested in it, we're still very, very early into this asset.
actually, I just occurred to me. I have one more Bitcoin story from the last week. The 15, 17, we had our national yearly gathering in San Diego. We suffered for Jesus in San Diego in October. Just last week, called the Here We Still Stand conference. I was getting to know somebody there. I've met him before. He's, what would you say? He was an attendee, registrant. He and his wife were there. I was just asking him about his vocation. I had no idea what he did in life. And so we had some free moments. And he works in the IT industry, and he oversees operations minimally for some large server farms. And he said, yeah, it hasn't. It continues to be a good job, but it hasn't been incredibly ideal. He just hasn't super loved some of the work that he's been doing in past years. Is moving server farms from, I believe he was saying, the States to India, and it's just it was farming out. You know, it was outsourcing from American soil elsewhere. And I said, well, I don't know much, and I don't know all the reasons why your organization would do that. But I've got to imagine, from what I understand, part of it might be as simple as following cheap electricity. And he kind of looked at me like, how would you know that? You know? And then we talked further, and we were talking more, and it was mostly then at me just asking him questions about it. Maybe they were perceptive questions. But he finally said, he just kind of cockeyed. He's like, "Oh, that's right. You're into Bitcoin." And so he said he and his wife have been investing for quite some time. I don't even fully know what that means. It's probably just the beginning of this aspect of a growing friendship. Um, but I found this to be so fun about Bitcoin is we often talk about it about the rabbit holes, but I would just say its interconnectedness with a lot of other things, whether that be world history, monetary policy. It's helped me to see that the American left and right, while they are demarcated strongly in any number of things, they are unified in this, that it is important to get the presidency and the Congress. Why is it important? Because that determines who controls the money printer. I mean, come on, come on. And that also has great explanatory effect as to why politics is so heated in these years, But in this case, it had to do with industry, it had to do with technology. an area I've never worked in, I have no training in, but I was just able to ask some questions, and it was just that was fun for me. I think it was fun for him, and then he did the math. He figured out why a guy like me might know even the least thing about that, and so that was a lot of fun too. So I guess I did bump into another Bitcoiner in the wild, even as I made the personal commitment at our gathering, organization's gathering, that I was not going to bring up Bitcoin to anybody. And I think I fulfilled that, although I had several people bring it up to me. So that was fun.
It's awesome.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Tons of fun. And what's really fun is people are starting to interact with us a little bit around this podcast. And listener, we do this as a 100% labor of love. We just care about our friends. We are not in this to try to make Bitcoin go up. I mean, if we thought that, we would be insane, because we've been doing it for over a year, and the number of people that we could count that have substantively gotten into Bitcoin so far, it would not be worth our time. We do this because we enjoy our friendship around this, and because we'd love to include you in that friendship. So reach out to us and let us know what you think. Let us know that you're there, you're alive, you're listening, you're thinking, and we'd love to, certainly love to have conversation with you offline. But I also will throw out the invitation again that if you're a listener, and whether you have significant questions or have a story, we'd love to have you on and hear a little bit from your perspective. So great to be with you all today. We'll be back for another episode soon. Take care.